as I'm sitting across the table from him, I'm having an out-of-body experience out of fear. Like, is to sit and tell him, I said, you're not going to make it.
Right. Wow.
I don't know if anybody else is telling you this, but here's why. You can't get there from here. And yeah, so that might have been a career limiting move, but
That was
that's my
honest.
it's honest and it's my nature. Like it's like you can't fix a problem if you don't name it.
Well, hey there, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. I want to thank all of you for continuing to support this channel. We continue to get subscribers, and make sure you tell your friends and family to hit that like button and subscribe button, and please share the content with your friends and family, and even with enemies. Enemies need to learn about leadership too, I guess. So. And
Thank you for supporting my writing efforts. Last book, Omega Deception, was able to make #1 in certain categories in Amazon, so that was awesome. But forget the usual. That's my usual stuff here. Now we get to the main event. I'm really happy with the guest that we have today. An old friend, someone that we met way back in the early Microsoft days, and I can truly say that she was a partner and a friend, and we could confide in each other when things were getting wacky with the bureaucracy there. And she's gone on to some greater things. Karen Worstell is an expert in cyber, but more importantly than that, she's a great human being, great leader, and has done so many things in the business community. And I just wanted to introduce my friend and colleague, Karen Worstell. Welcome to the Ronin Leadership Podcast.
Hey, Mike, it's so great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. As you know, I talked to you before. We talked about doing this to keep this very conversational. I guess first thing, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do now, and maybe walk us through quickly your journey. Like, how did you end up where you are now? And then we can kind of dissect a lot of that along the way.
Sure. Well, I like to the origin story from the cybersecurity journey, which I think a lot of people are interested in, was my grad school software professor encrypted our final.
Wow.
And we were, there was no such thing. People weren't talking about anything like cybersecurity or anything back then.
Right.
But if we had done the homework during the semester and wrote all the code breaking tools that he told us to write, then we would be able to take the final exam. And I was completely hooked by this. And so I think that ended up influencing the project that I did. It was called like a conservative logic encryption system that I demonstrated for my master's project, and that ended up getting me hired in my first job at the Boeing company. And so that's kind of the big origin story. I fell into what I do. It turned out to be a very happy, uh, serendipitous kind of a thing. It was, I think, probably just made for my personality. And I like solving hard problems that people haven't solved before. And that's always been kind of my orientation. That's what gets me interested and makes me get up in the morning. So it was a good place to be at the very beginning of the whole cybersecurity thing. So I helped develop the commercial program for cybersecurity for the Boeing company. We were already doing things for the Department of Defense, but we needed to do that on the commercial side. So I helped with that. And being in that position of um, of doing things that people hadn't done before, and in some ways kind of made me a de facto expert because I was having to break new ground and figure stuff out that hadn't really been done. And so when it came time for somebody else to do it, it was like, oh, Karen Worstell does this work and this is, she knows this. So it set me up for a career that was a very interesting career because I think just because I think I was I was determined to pay back my student loans. I was very worried about that at the time, and
Right.
there was a huge motivator there. I had two small kids, so um, getting getting on board with saying yes to almost anything that somebody at work needed me to do,
Mm-hmm.
like it really opened up doors to things that I couldn't imagine because it wasn't like I sat down and said, "This is the career I want." I had no idea what the career was, and neither did anybody else. And so just kind of like getting into this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do the thing that they set in front of me that said, I need somebody to fix this. And um, and so that really led me to having, I think, my career at Microsoft to me was sort of like the job I dreamed of after a couple of decades. It was like, this is what I really want to do.
All right.
And when I left Microsoft, I took a sabbatical. I
Mm-hmm.
did some consulting on the side, but I took a sabbatical and I ended up, there was a confluence of events, which we'll maybe get into later, but I became
Okay.
a chaplain on my sabbatical. So I served as a palliative care fellow for the VA. And that was hugely helpful to me. And then I came back into tech and kind of combined my experience as a chaplain and my experience as a technologist. And today I work with individuals. I do some consulting on the side for companies, but I work with individuals who want to kind of crack the code to the career they really crave and figure out how to make that happen.
Wow. Now that's quite the journey in a nutshell. And it's still ongoing. So,
Yeah.
so go back to, your early days in cyber.
Hmm.
Uh, was it the Wild West when it came to cyber? I mean, what would you describe the state of cyber security at the time you entered that particular field?
Well, there was no cybersecurity. Nobody was using that term. That term kind of came into widespread usage probably in the around 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it wasn't mainstream by any means. And when I started in 1988, it was still legit for us to hack the VAX VMS at the college, at the university. Like it was still legit to do outrageous things on computers in the name of learning about them.
Yeah.
And it hadn't become really criminalized or anything like that. It was, being a hacker was not a bad thing. Being a hacker to try to understand how the emerging network world worked was
Mm-hmm.
was part of figuring out how to put it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had one of the best jobs of my life at the beginning of my career um, in Boeing Research and Technology. And one of the things that we were doing is collecting all the open source tools that were on the internet that were used for hacking.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
fun story, Dan Farmer and Vitsa Venema, they wrote some code that they named Satan, and they made a
Mm-hmm.
big thing about releasing it on the internet. Um, and people were very, very worried. It had this horrible, scary name. Um, and they did that on purpose, of course, to get the attention, I believe. But the tool needed some testing. And I got in touch with them and I said, look, this is what I do. I'm at Boeing, I'm at research and technology. We do the cybersecurity research. And if you will give me the code for your tool before you release it on the internet, I promise you, what I will do for you is I will test it on Boeing's network and give you feedback about how to optimize your software. And they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned, I mean, it's like, what harm can it be to ask, right?
Right,
Um,
exactly.
And so what that meant was that we had the tool before it was released, and then we could analyze the code. We knew exactly what it would and wouldn't do. That's when we found out that it would actually go from this, demonic name to they changed the name from Satan to Santa, and it
Okay.
looked very innocuous. So,
Yeah.
so we knew that it wasn't going to be something that we had to worry about. But what we ended up doing with it was a very fun experiment, and it taught me a really valuable lesson. Um, so we ran the tool across Boeing's entire Unix network,
Hmm.
several hundred servers at that time, and on the commercial side, not the government side. And so in order to run that test, we had to send out a message to everyone who was associated with running a Unix platform and say, we're going to run this test on this day, and we want you to be looking at your system logs. And if you see a footprint that looks like X,
Hmm.
that's us. That's
Okay.
our test.
All right.
So don't worry about it. We're not hacking you. We're just testing the software. And I mean, you couldn't do that kind of thing today, right?
No.
So it was kind of maybe Wild West a little
All
bit.
right.
But then then what we said was, here's the phone number to call if you see something else in your log files that worries you. And our phone rang off the hook.
Really? Wow.
What it showed me was, first of all, we had engaged them in doing something that they were kind of supposed to be doing, but they really weren't.
Hmm.
And and so they became a part of this kind of very cool project. And um, we basically deputized everybody to be part of looking at the security of the network. So instead of me writing rules, or instead of the security office writing rules and sending them out and say, you must do the following things, we
Hmm.
deputized everybody to be part of the cool stuff.
Nice.
And and we learned about stuff going on inside our network we would have never seen.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a huge lesson learned, I think, for um, culture.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to get something done, you don't do it by making demands and then penalizing people for not doing things right. You make them a part of the solution. And so, anyway, that was kind of that was a little bit of a Wild West. I almost lost my job too, because not for the Dan Farmer thing, but because we collected all these tools off of the internet, all the open source and everything that was out there,
Right.
and then we optimized it. So there was one person on my team who was brilliant at this. His name is Steve Whitlock, and he retired from the Boeing company a few years ago. But he was absolutely brilliant at taking these things, and then we sandboxed it all so we could play around with it, and then we would optimize the code, and we would create our own tool set. And so we had the best of all the hacking tools that we were using to test our systems internally.
Hmm.
And I did a presentation, like a brown bag for the research and technology department. And one of the executives kind of misunderstood what it was we were trying to do. They thought we were hacking Boeing and that we were using these tools to hack Boeing.
Right.
And I almost lost my job that day. But once we were able to sit down and explain, exactly how, no, it's like, no, wait, this is a good thing. Well,
Right.
we're
This is a
using
good
all the
thing.
tools from the
Right.
outside that they're going to be using on us. So we might as well find out where all of our vulnerabilities and weaknesses are. So
Yeah.
that was, yeah, that was kind of the orientation we had. We had such free reign because people hadn't boxed in all of the hard and fast rules around cybersecurity like we have now.
Mm.
Policies and all of that kind of stuff were still getting written.
Yeah.
And and yeah, so
Um,
that was kind of Wild West.
yeah. That was great though. I like that, it's like even on the physical security side, it's always, I came from government, and it was always top down, right? But you get to like Microsoft, and no, it's influence without authority. You can't just tell a business unit to do X, Y, Z. You can tell them a little bit, but mostly, to your point, to get the people to buy in, that was brilliant, and then look what you, like you said, look what you found out, all the vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah. We had an amnesty day, and it was like, you can tell us everything. Nobody's going to get in trouble for helping us understand what's really going on in our
Right.
environment. And so
Yeah.
that was fun.
Yeah. Awesome. So how long were you with Boeing before? Did you go from Boeing to Microsoft, or was there something in between?
Oh, there was lots in between.
Okay. Yeah.
I went from Boeing to a short stint. I did a short stint in Houston for Union Carbide. And that was my first major promotion into management.
Mm-hmm.
I was already a manager, but at a director level.
Okay.
And then from there, I got hired by Stanford Research Institute
Mm-hmm.
in Menlo Park, and that I went back into a research role.
Okay.
So we were doing cybersecurity research and working really closely with the computer labs and the guys doing the intrusion detection research for SRI.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was on the consulting side, and we did some of the largest installations of intrusion detection technology that we had to customize from the commercial off the shelf stuff that was
Mm-hmm.
available at the time,
All right.
and make that work for some very large customers. So we did, yeah, that was kind of my area of expertise at that time. And we ran the I4 program, the International Information Integrity Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And then SRI spun us off into a .com, of course.
All right.
And so we rode out through a whole .com boom until it crashed.
Right.
And yeah, my stint as a they promoted me to be the CEO for the .com
Mm-hmm.
in order to get it sold,
Mm.
because the VCs were done. They weren't going to continue to fund it. So my job was to find a buyer, which we did. And I sold myself out of a job,
Mm-hmm.
and I took a little bit of a break. And here's another good lesson I learned. Um, I had made a ton of through the course of my job. I'd made a ton of relationships, and my network was
Mm-hmm.
pretty well developed by then, for at least for that time frame. And after I took a break after selling our company, which was called Atomic Tangerine, um, great.com name.
All right.
I went back to, I decided I'd send a note out to my network. I said, hey, I'm coming back into back into work again. If anybody's got some consulting gigs or anything that they would be interested, I'd love to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got a phone call the next day from a good friend of mine, Rhonda McLean. She was the head of information security at Bank of America at the time, and she said, "I just didn't think you'd actually be interested, but since you sent me out a note, I'm going to ask." She says, "Would you come work for me?"
Oh,
And the next day I was hired.
wow.
So I went back to work for Bank of America. And when I was working at the time I was working for Bank of America, it was kind of an unusual situation.
Mm-hmm.
I had my mother living with me, and she was, what do you call that? In a moderate stage of Alzheimer's disease.
Mm-hmm.
So I had my headset on with my microphone, and I was running around the house chasing her
There.
while I
Wow.
was working most of the time. And when they consolidated that job back to Charlotte, I stayed in Washington, and I went from Bank of America. I went to AT&T Wireless, and then after AT&T Wireless, that's when I went to Microsoft.
Microsoft. Wow. Um, yeah, that's a lot of experiences.
Yeah.
Question though, because it kind of parallels something I did, back in the agency. So you'd done the management stuff, first initial jobs, and then you took the one kind of research position, right, for a little bit. How did you feel about that transition? Did you miss leadership at that point, or were you just happy to do something else at the time?
Well, I wasn't really going back into individual contributor. I ran the consulting
Mm,
arm. Uh, so at SRI.
yeah.
And so we had a small team,
Hmm.
but basically the I-4 program and the consulting service, information security service that SRI International offered.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
I ran that. So yeah, I was still doing management.
Still, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I once I became a manager,
Mhm.
I don't think I ever went back to being an individual contributor again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That was my point. So I took one position. I'd always been a leader up to a point, and then I took a position with the Inspector General's office, and for a couple of years, great job. But as an individual contributor, I couldn't really make any changes, and the boss was a nice guy, just very ineffective,
Mm,
and you can't make changes. So from that point on, I realized I needed to stay in that leadership realm. I'm glad that you've kind of stayed the
yeah.
course there. Um, so what made you go to Microsoft?
Well, they recruited me.
They recruited you. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Good.
Yeah, I was really, I never had to go look for a job really. I was pretty much always recruited to a new job.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to Microsoft. I was very intimidated about going to work for Microsoft.
Hmm.
It was a completely different culture than anything I had worked in before. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I'd been there a while.
Right.
But it was Microsoft. I mean, I figured I would have new opportunities to um, work on a cybersecurity problem that nobody had solved yet. The way I looked at Microsoft at that time was it owned the network. I mean,
Hmm.
NT. From a corporate standpoint, their installed base was enormous, and it included the desktop, the network, the servers, right? Um, and the Office applications. So from my standpoint, there was an opportunity there of an ecosystem that if someone wanted to solve a classic cybersecurity problem for corporate America, Microsoft
Hmm.
could have done it.
Hmm.
They chose not to.
Yeah.
And that part of that is culture. There was no one driver pulling the architecture across um, the company into a cohesive whole. And at the time I joined, it was still they were doing the security. What do they call it? The memo had come out,
Hmm.
and we were still doing the trustworthy computing initiative that Scott Charney and Howard Schmidt had kind of teed up.
The names from the past. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so I was there kind of like the next CISO doing that job. And so there was a lot, there was a lot of demands being made on the developers and, the whole Windows team and the whole Office team, everybody was having to make some very significant changes to the way that they did their job.
Right.
And there was a lot of, there's just a lot going on. And it didn't, I had the idea that, wow, if we could have one unified strategy,
Go figure. Right.
we could conquer the world was
Yeah.
kind of how I had looked at it. And and one of the about 6 months into my job is when I realized that Bill Gates had made a promise
Hmm.
that they would provide cross-platform single sign-on by I think by 2006 or something like that. and he
Mm.
made that promise on the main stage at RSA. And I sat down with my team and we looked at the current status. And my very first meeting with Bill, as I'm sitting across the table from him, I'm having an out of body experience out of fear, like, is to sit and tell him, I said, you're not going to make it.
Right.
I
Wow.
don't know if anybody else is telling you this, but here's why. You can't get there from here. And yeah, so that might have been a career limiting move, but
That was
that's my
honest.
it's honest and it's my nature. Like it's like you can't fix a problem if you don't name it.
Right.
You know, you got to be able to be radically real
Hmm.
about the state of where you are before you can decide what steps to take to make it better. And that was my motive behind that, was to say, if you want to fix this, we have some work, we have major work to do.
Hmm.
But yeah, that just wasn't the culture of Microsoft in those days, as you well know.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very disparate, a lot of silos,
Yeah.
a lot of fiefdoms.
Yeah.
Hard to cut cross enterprise to get anything like that, like you were saying, done. And eventually, it got to an infrastructure where at least you had a lot of the players together, and just after you left, that were able to work well in the sandbox. I assumed but your conversation with Bill, he didn't take that too well, probably, and
I literally had an out of body experience. I wasn't joking.
yeah,
I was so terrified
yeah.
um, that I remember being like up at the ceiling, looking down at myself, going, "Oh, look, her mouth, her lips are moving."
Right? Yeah, she's alive. She's breathing.
How am I talking? I
Right?
am not present in my own body.
Right.
And yeah, no, he didn't react well.
Yeah. But
But
that,
what would you expect?
right. Right. He's committed himself in public,
Yeah,
and now, he's
yeah.
being told differently, which, frankly, from not that I'm, obviously Bill's Bill, so he's a genius, but, either, well, you might be able to answer this, either he was led to believe that you could go the sign on across platform and no one had asked you the question, or
Mhm.
he hadn't asked the question beforehand, he just committed it and just expected people to execute, right? It's got to be one of the other.
Yeah, one of those two. I don't know
Yeah.
which.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it that was, I think they realized that they had a cultural challenge,
Yeah.
and yeah, there was just it just wasn't set up to succeed in that way.
Yeah.
That's not it. That wasn't how it was, like that wasn't the genesis of it, and that creative destruction was the way they operated,
Hmm.
to see who got to the finish line first.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, that was hard.
Yep. I can imagine, but it's a great abject lesson when it comes to leadership to be able to tell truth to power, even though it's risky, and right, and it could be risky in a number of ways. But I think that's important. I mean, that is. Um, Jack Welch used to talk about that a lot back in the day in his books, and when he took over GE, a lot of people don't like him, Neutron Jack, but he did what he had to do. But he said one of the biggest hidden stains of business is people just don't tell the truth, right? They dance around these issues, and so you can never get to the solution, trying to keep the bosses happy.
Yeah.
And it's not the right way to do it, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I guess by the time I got into Microsoft, I had had that lesson reinforced multiple times.
Hmm.
And we had, I think that the first time really that happened with me was at SRI when the VCs decided, Atomic Tangerine, we were Atomic Tangerine then.
Right.
And we were getting tranched by the VCs
Hmm.
on a weekly basis. Every Monday, I had to go in for a board meeting and find out if we were going to be funded.
Hmm.
And they wanted me to pretty much bet all the chips on black
Oh,
to get the company sold, right?
right.
To do whatever it took and spend the money to get the company sold.
Right.
Um, And my grandson's with me. Hi, Elliot. Do you need something? Can I
That's
wait?
okay.
Can we wait just a sec? Okay.
Aw.
Um, and if I if I did that, if I did the thing that they did and I ran this out to the last possible cent
Mm,
of the money that we had, um, my concern was that all of the employees, we had 0% attrition. People were staying to stay with the program to try to help us succeed in getting to the end game. And they were giving up vacations. They were giving, people were making a lot of sacrifices. And my concern was that we would get to the end if I ran it out and we didn't have a buyer, or the buyer decided they weren't going to hire all our people, or whatever the scenario was. I needed to be able to make these people whole.
right.
And I went to the board and I said, this is how much money it's going to take for that to happen. This is the accrued lost sick leave, whatever the vacation time, everything else that we owe these people. And it was about close to about $400,000, if I remember right.
Wow.
And when I told them that, they said, okay, hear you. And then we got to the end game and I got a buyer. We ran out to the very last dime and the buyer took all the people, but they said, we're not going to pay them for, it's not our responsibility to pay them this money.
Okay.
And we were out. So I had to go back to the board and I was like, do you remember we had this conversation
Hmm.
and now we need to pay and I don't have any money? And they said, I suppose you expect us to go back to our firms and ask them to ante up more money for you? And I said, I don't care how you get it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We have this agreement and this is the right thing to do. Do you know what they did? Those guys went into their own pocket.
Oh, wow.
They came up with almost $500,000 out of their own pockets and paid.
Wow.
And I mean, I guess my core competency is, I've been told, is a lightning rod.
Mm,
I'm willing to take the hit. Do you know what I'm saying? I'll be okay. I
right.
might be a little worse for wear, but I'll be all right. But it needs to be said. And that just was like really like a message from heaven to me
Mhm.
that said, if you hadn't spoken up and put this on the table when you did, as
Right.
uncomfortable as it was, there would be no opportunity to come back and ask.
Yeah. Right.
So it's just been reinforced every time I've had a major corporate function
Hmm.
that's the right thing to do. And it's a crucial conversation and it's uncomfortable, but it still needs to be said.
Amen. I agree to that.
Yeah.
Uh, from a leadership perspective, were you always comfortable in being direct, or is this
In
something
being
that
what?
you in just in being direct, right? Because a lot of people are not. They're more subtle. They're afraid to just say the things that they need to be said directly. Is it something that you were always comfortable with, even like in college and in your early years in business and enterprise, or is this something that,
Yeah.
yeah?
I think I used to joke about I'm not sophisticated enough to code switch.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Like it really, I want it to be what you see is what you get.
Hmm.
And so I think I've probably always been like that.
Yeah.
And my son and I talk about it a lot about he's made the comment to me on social media
Mm.
that he sees my LinkedIn account. And um, I try to keep it professional,
Hmm.
but I also don't hide how I see things.
Hmm.
And he's like, really? Like, some people aren't going to like what you have to say. Like,
Yeah.
not my people.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
Life's too short, frankly. You know.
well, and what do they say? It's like, it's just so much easier to always tell the truth because then you don't have to keep track of what you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Good. Good. So, from Microsoft, where did you go after after that experience?
Well, that's a great lesson. So I left Microsoft not the way I wanted to.
Yeah, I was
I
sorry to see
didn't,
you go, by the way, from a personal standpoint. 'Cause-
yeah, I wasn't fired,
Yeah,
but I got out before I was
sure, sure,
probably,
sure.
or demoted or whatever. It wasn't going to be pretty.
Right.
Um, and I'm not going to go. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter
No,
what all of the circumstances around that were. I think a lot of people today, especially CISOs, encounter similar kinds of situations.
sure.
And the turnover, the time at the time that I left, I was a partner at Microsoft. And at the time that I left, new partners who came in from the outside had an average tenure of 10 months.
Wrong. Yeah.
And I made it past that at least.
Yeah.
But the toll that took on my self-confidence was pretty extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to go to another corporate job. I really had, I felt wrong one way or the other, whether it was right or wrong. The story in my own head was one that made me feel a lot of shame. And I talk about that now because I'm over it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it took about 10 years.
Mm.
And it just felt like such an epic failure. You know, I have to tell a story because you were part of this story. Do you remember when I came to your office to have a meeting and I had just fallen down the stairs?
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
So, just to give you the listeners
Yeah.
a little bit of background, I had and I don't think you know all of this pre story, which was uh I think that happened in like around February timeframe, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. I had been going to see a therapist because things were rough at work. And I went to see, her name was Louise.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go see Louise. And she said, "Well, tell me what it's like. What's it like at work?" I said, "It's a little like getting kicked in the stomach and getting my legs swept out from under me every day. Every day."
Right.
And I'm not a quitter, you know, like I'm gonna tough this out, I'm gonna make this work, I'm gonna figure it out, blah, blah, blah. Some things, by the way, little spoiler alert, some things are not able to be figured out.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like the what is it, Kenny? Is it the Kenny Rogers? Kenny Rogers song is "No one to hold them and no one to fold them."
Yeah, exactly.
So I hadn't figured that out yet.
Yeah.
Uh, and in January or so, I was working at Microsoft in Georgia.
Mhm.
I got I had an appendicitis attack, and I had to go get emergency surgery. And the day that I met you was my
Mm-hmm.
first day back at work after 10 days off. And I decided that I was not getting enough exercise. And so I was going to go up to the top of the stairs in your building, which were concrete stairs, the ones in the
Yep.
back.
And I was at the end, at the top of the stairs, right at
Yeah.
the first office there. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I've got a brand new laptop in my hands, brand new. And I get to the very top of the concrete stairs and my legs go out from under me. I
Right.
go down a flight of stairs. And we didn't know when I was and then I went to your meeting,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I didn't the laptop was fine. The laptop was completely unscathed. After I left your meeting, I think we figured out that I was injured.
Yeah.
I ended up going to the emergency room and had my knee stapled together.
Yeah. It was a wicked gash. It was, yeah.
And
It's bad.
yeah, so I went to see Louise because I had an appointment with Louise later that same day.
Right.
And I was hobbled in on crutches and she said, "What the heck happened to you?" And I said, "Well," I told her the story. She goes, "I don't want this to be lost on you. I want you to listen." This she did it just like this. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Just a few months ago, you told me that going to work was like getting kicked in the stomach and having your legs swept out from under you." She says, "What are you waiting for?"
Mm. Mm-hmm.
She said, you are you like, you need to go home right now and start thinking very happy thoughts."
Yeah. Right.
Just I'm going to manifest whatever it is that I'm saying, and so
Right.
that she wanted me to resign, and eventually I did. And um, so there was a lesson in that. I mean, for me, I had been driven as a leader by fear of failure, always,
Mm-hmm.
that I was somehow going to dork it up, and I
Mm-hmm.
needed to work as hard as it took to not dork it up. And what when you know when to hold them and know when to fold them, the fold them piece is not necessarily a failure. It's something else. It's a not the right time, not the right place, not the right fit, whatever it might be. That doesn't that's like, when you're trying to teach a fish to climb a tree. They're not going to fail. They're not going to succeed. And but I had taken it very personally. And when I went back and told Louise that I had resigned, and I said, I feel like such a failure, like I failed. And she goes,
Mm-hmm.
and you're still standing. You're you're still here.
Right.
And I was like, here's the key lesson that I got out of that was from that day forward, I needed to be driven not by fear of failure, but by love of what I do.
Mm, yes.
And everything had to be under that rubric.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so from that was the big turning point for me. Probably saved my life in a way
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not living under that kind of stress and strain.
Yeah.
I'm I'm doing exactly what I was made to do. And um and I'm not trying to force fit that into somebody else's mold,
Yeah.
which is
But that's great emotional intelligence on your part too. I mean, I love that saying that you're driven not by fear of failure, but by loving what you do. I think there are a lot of folks out there in the enterprise world that are driven by fear of failure, which is a hell of a way to live your business life, right? As you experienced.
it can result in incredible results,
Mm-hmm.
but at such a high price.
Yeah. At what toll, right? What does it
Mhm.
take on the uh,
Yeah.
on you? And but yeah, I remember that meeting because she was just like hobbling in there and said, "What happened?" And uh,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
got to the meeting anyway, so that was good. But um, so I mean, resilience seems to be a theme throughout your career, right? Being able to take things, bounce back, and this was a big one. You said it took
Yep.
about 10 years for you to kind of wrap your head around all of this to feel good about yourself again, or is that the right way to put it, or?
Yeah, to not so you know what one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, she says um when shame's in the driver's seat, perfectionism is riding shotgun.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt shame because I had an image of what success looked like, and it was unattainable. But that was my perfectionism, I think. I'm kind of a recovered perfectionist, maybe,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or recovering, I should say.
Recovering perfection. Yes, recovering. Maybe not 100%, but you're getting there.
I'm
Yeah,
working on it.
yeah, you're working on it.
And
So.
so the shame piece of it, though, I didn't know any of this. I just knew that I was carrying this big, heavy thing
Mm,
that was, even though I had made a decision that I wasn't going to live with fear of failure, I still had this blot that looked to me like a huge, like negative, a huge negative.
mm,
Um, and I needed to be able to, I, I went to an event
mm,
actually where the speaker said, we were all in round tables, and the speaker said, the exercise is that you need to think about the thing about you that if one of your closest confidants knew that about you and posted it on Facebook,
mm,
you would be devastated. that was the assignment.
Interesting.
And for me, it was my departure from Microsoft.
Hmm.
I just didn't, I'd never talked about it to anybody. And just kind of carried it with me like a big old lead balloon. And so then I was like, all right, if that's the assignment, I was like, okay, trust the process. I'm going to get on board with this. And I did it. And it took all the power out of it. Like there was no power left in it whatsoever. It wasn't a secret. And the other person is like, huh? I had to tell it to somebody, and they're like, that's your secret? And it just evaporated. And it's that when shame's like, there's another Brene Brown metaphor, but it grows in a petri dish and it does best in secrecy.
Mhm.
And once that's gone, it has nothing to fuel it anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was another good lesson, I think.
Yeah.
And now I talk about it and everybody knows.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it took guts for you to actually admit that, right? Because they're going to be the inevitable follow-up. Well, why did you say that? And what's the context? And blah blah blah. But then again, you're right. It defangs this thing that's been over your head for all these years.
Yeah, it defanged it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that was about the same time frame that um, I lost my mom. So she had
Mm.
been living with me, and
Yeah.
then she was in long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2011, she finally passed away from Alzheimer's.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I'm getting back into it. I'm getting back on the horse. This was 2011, and I left Microsoft in what, 2005?
Yeah. Right. Yep.
And so maybe it wasn't quite 10 years. It was maybe less. It's all a little bit blurry at the time in the time frame
Yeah.
or timeline, but it was a long time that I carried that along. And when I decided I was going to go back into work, I couldn't make myself do it after my mom's death. That grieving process,
Mhm.
um, and there had been some other things that were going on at the same time. I was like, why can't I'm just blocked. I am absolutely blocked. I even bought the Sands had a training course on digital forensics. It's a
Mhm.
very expensive training course. It required a lot of hardware to purchase. And I made myself go buy that thinking this is going to make me do it. Now I'm going to get back into it again. And I never even opened up the book.
Really? Okay.
And then it was just so confusing. And that was the block. It was sort of like this thing that says, I'm going to redirect you. You need to go spend some time elsewhere. And I changed course and went into the chaplaincy service. That's how
Wow.
that all happened.
I was going to ask, that's how you end up doing the chaplain activity.
Mm.
Did, was, it's really interesting because you're at a space where you think you want to go back to right away to the enterprise world and you find out you don't. Then did you seek out chaplaincy, or was it something that someone told you about and you thought that might be good for me to kind of do something for a while, or?
It was another serendipity moment. That's kind of like the story of my life.
Yeah,
These
sounds like
little,
I could tell. Yeah, right.
um, I used to use a daytimer, but way
Hmm.
back when I was at the Boeing company, I used a daytimer for everything.
Okay.
And one of the things that I would do every year is write out my goals.
Mm.
These are the things that matter to me. And in 1997, I had written down on a piece of paper that I wanted to do more with my faith, more in service with my faith. And I thought chaplaincy was potentially an area where I could do that. I wrote that in 1997. The reason I know that is because when I was cleaning out my bookshelf, that piece of paper fell out of that daytimer. And I looked at that and I was like, chaplaincy. And so I was also working because I was the guardian for another estate, and for the person that had died, I was the sort of handling the estate from a philanthropy standpoint.
Mm,
And I was meeting with a friend of mine who was also the head of the philanthropy department for the regional medical center in South Puget Sound, there in Washington. And we were chatting, and I was telling her about my difficulty trying to figure out how to go back to work. And I said, maybe I should just sort of think about chaplaincy because that's been something that I thought was important to me at one point in my life. She said, just like this, she says, there is a cohort for training for the chaplaincy that starts day after tomorrow, and they are hiring the last candidate. And I'm sending you over there right now. I'm calling them to tell them you're on your way.
jeez.
And they hired and they took me.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. So I think this is providence because think about the paper falling out.
I
Then
know.
is that right? And
Yeah.
I mean, it's not by a fluke that this happened. Uh, and when you got into this and you started doing the training, was it something that you just kind of loved right away?
Loved,
Yeah, yeah,
loved.
yeah.
And yeah, I ended up getting another master's degree in theology.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and yeah, I mean, it's core to who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I, like it's not where I'm not the kind of I never was the kind of chaplain, and I still am not, that says this is how you need to believe.
Mm-hmm.
My job was to meet people on a spiritual path where they were, and I have my own center, but that's not for me to put on somebody else. And I just found that level of connection
Mm-hmm.
with human beings to be I don't there's
Mm-hmm.
hardly a word for it. Um, I'm going to get emotional thinking about it, but
Yeah.
the it's a sacred place to be in, uh to share an empathetic bond with another human being who's
Mm-hmm.
in deep pain.
Right. Can you
And
remember? Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, I'm just going to say that that sacred space is is exhausting on one
Mm-hmm.
hand, but it's also so incredibly deeply meaningful. If it gives meaning to your life,
Yeah.
in a way that it's hard to do on a 9 to 5.
Yeah. Can you exactly? I mean, I've never experienced it, but I've dealt with a lot of chaplains. I can see it. It can take a lot
Yeah.
emotionally. Can you remember your first assignment, if that's the word for it, your first encounter after you finish your training as a chaplain?
Well, the thing is that chaplain training starts with encounters.
Ah.
So the very first day, and it's an interesting thing to look back on,
Mm-hmm.
because here's all of these newbies, like it's many people who are pastors or training to be priests or pastors, and they go to one uh, chaplaincy training is broken up into um, uh, the cohorts last for several months,
Okay.
and you go through X numbers of them. And if you want to become a professional chaplain, you have way more to do than if you were a pastor or a priest.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of this in this room together, all brand new, like not really sure what we're getting into, but we think we have either we're there because we have to be there, or as a pastoral trainee, or
Right.
we're there to become a professional chaplain. And the very first day, they're like, so you have this many patients you're going to go see today. That's it. That's the first day.
Wow.
And it's like, what if they cry? What am I going to say? It's the most incredible experience in learning what your own barriers are to
Mm-hmm.
stepping into somebody else's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because we naturally, as human beings, avoid painful, you know,
Right.
painful experiences. That's natural. And
Yeah.
so when someone else is in that, it's really interesting to watch. There's all kinds of things. I call them a spiritual bypass, but all the things that we do to avoid going there, and chaplains all have to live through that and see how they're doing it themselves before they can help us change that.
Mhm.
So a great example is somebody's in some kind of personal crisis or deep personal pain, and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm just so sorry to hear that. I'll pray for you.
Right. Yeah.
Check the box, get out of the room. Like,
Right.
and it's done nothing to create connection. In fact, it's done just the opposite.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
And we have to learn that through the experience of trying it, and realizing and doing the deconstruction of it after the fact to say, how'd that go for you? And
Mhm.
and 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 what do you think that was like for them? And a lot of it's like, oh man, I need to,
Mhm.
why am I resistant to being able to open myself up to be in this space with this person? And it's a great lesson. I needed it. I really, there was a lot of, I think I did it for 5 years.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, just coming off of that experience with Microsoft and then kind of finding your way, and then you're into this, and now it's another whole emotional thing where, like you say, you have to be in that profession as a chaplain. You have to be vulnerable, right? As much as the person that you're counseling and
You you
trying to help
can't
them. Yeah.
you cannot be in an encounter with another person who that demands that deserves connection and
Hmm.
be shields up.
Right. Yeah.
You can't. You
Yeah.
have to be able to hold yourself together. I used to use the metaphor. I don't know if it's a very good one, but it made sense to me
Mm-hmm.
that if there's a person in a burning house and I'm the one who knows it, I need to be able to get into the house and get out. I need to be able to get into the house and be with them and get them safely
Mm-hmm.
to a a place. I'm not their helper, I'm not their healer, but you know, the metaphor breaks down a little bit because I'm not fixing anybody, and I'm not there to be the helper. I'm there to be in the space, in
Right.
their experience. And organically, if that takes us to a better
Mm-hmm.
better place, then that's the idea. But I've got to be able to get myself out.
Yeah.
And that's not been, yeah, it's just not always going to be very clean.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not like you see, I don't know, if it was TV where there's something going on and then you fix it at the end and that end of episode, right?
Well, and everybody when where there's like cosplaying, right? They're all in role and all in perfect role.
Right.
And we're so unperfect, that it's kind of not like that. It's messy and rough around the edges. And I think that's the thing that we have to be, it's like driven by what you love instead of fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
When you can step into that experience, knowing that you're going to do your very best based on everything that you can bring to it,
Yeah.
but you have no control over how this is going to run.
Yeah. Wow.
And and you know, some of it's pretty rough.
Yeah. I'm sure you run the gamut from anger to distress to
Mm.
sadness to all of it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I think, there was another really good lesson, if I can just share one,
Yeah.
because when I was at the VA, I was the palliative care fellow at the VA in Portland, and for a short time. And uh, I have a pretty good capacity to hold other people's anger.
Mm-hmm.
That experience with Bill Gates probably expanded my capacity a lot.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it helped.
and and it doesn't intimidate me. Other
Hmm.
people's anger doesn't intimidate me. And that's kind of unusual. And when I was at the VA, there was a Marine Corps officer, former officer, who had been exposed to Agent Orange, and he was really, really sick.
Hmm.
And he had always been the strong one in the family, for his family. And his wife was losing her Marine.
Hmm.
And it sent her into a tailspin, as I'm sure it would for anyone. But her reaction was anger. So
Yeah.
everybody reacts differently, right? Some people are just unbelievably sad, but some people express this in ways that are really angry.
Yeah.
And I found that I kept trying to calm her down, and which was not the right thing to do. Like, this is one of the messy lessons. And I remember going back to my supervisor and trying to tell her, I said, I'm struggling with this. This was a really hard one. And I have to have multiple encounters with her. And it's just getting worse. It's escalating and getting worse and worse. And she said, of all the people on the service, she says, you are the only one who can walk in and hold a container for somebody else's anger and let them have it. Not let them have it, but let them have their anger.
Yeah. Let them own it. And yeah.
That's her process.
Hmm. Yeah.
And instead of trying to confine it or change it or
Yeah.
make me comfortable,
Right. Right. Right.
um, it's just it's a constant evolution and learning process of who we are as human beings,
Hmm.
um, and what does it take for us to be truly present with
Yeah.
somebody else, no matter what.
Yeah. I think that's important. Yeah, I went through that. Mine was anger. When my wife was passing away, and after she passed, that was just, yeah. And like you said, there are other people that are incredibly sad, but you filled a needed role, and I think that needed role was not just for the people that you dealt with and helped through, but it was for you too. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, I think. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think if we're willing to to be honest, it's another honesty thing. It's like this is my honest emotional feel experience, and what is that teaching me?
Hmm. Yeah.
Not I shouldn't feel this way.
Right.
Right. It's it and anyway, that's part of what now I come back into the tech sector,
Right.
and it's just been so helpful, because to me it's all about people and relationships.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think this has just been I've been a very fortunate person to have the opportunity to have that kind of training and that kind of uh, uh unvarnished it's unvarnished peeling back the layers of
Mm.
looking at yourself and going,
Right.
uh, and what can I do to make it better next time?
Yeah, so you're back in the tech sector. You're running your own business at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's a W Risk Group is a consultancy
Yeah,
on what I call demonstrating due diligence to a defensible standard of care. So for people who are interested, that's just how do you navigate the complex world of regulatory rules and everything else, and
right.
build a strategy for security that gets you where you think you want to be
Yeah,
without being sidelined. And then I'd be launching a program that we had before the pandemic, and then got mothballed during the pandemic and while I was at VMware. So that's for I call it create your leading edge. It's for women in the
yeah,
cybersecurity field who are kind of undervalued and overlooked and passed over, and how to get them recognition and the compensation and the opportunities that they deserve.
Yeah, and lessons learned from obviously all of your experiences and things that you've had to go through, and you're still your journey is still ongoing, and I don't see. I mean, I'm not speaking for you, but I don't see retirement in your future anytime. I mean, pure retirement anytime in the future, correct?
I never had a model for that.
Yeah,
My father and my grandfather both worked until they stopped
yeah,
because in their 80s, and so I you know what, I'm doing what I love to do, and so I can't imagine it would be any better.
yeah. No, that's awesome. So we'll wrap this up now, but you've had an incredible career, and I knew you back when, and
Yeah.
all the things that you've gone through, and you've had a myriad of experiences, and I think, like I said, when we were talking earlier, that resilience just keeps coming to mind. You know, you're a very resilient person, um, and very real and honest, and I appreciate that in a leader. I think that's important. If And you were mentioning, the things that you're doing for other women coming up in the profession, and hopefully helping them through whatever pitfalls that they're going to run into and issues, things like that. Are there any, like, what are one or two things you can glean from your experience, your life, that you could lend to somebody to try to help them as they're trying to maneuver their way through this thing called life, through career and things like that, you know?
Yeah. Number one, you don't have to have it all figured out at the start.
Okay.
And number two, whenever an opportunity is presented and it makes you like makes your armpits tingle and you a little bit of stress sweat and it feels like
Yeah.
it's say yes.
Say yes. Okay.
Yeah. That's what opens the doors. You don't have to have the answers. You have
Yeah.
to be able
Lean
to, you have
into
to
it.
have the confidence to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I guess the final thing would be, and know when to fold them.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. I'm gonna remember that. That song's gonna be in my head now.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, Karen, thanks a lot for taking your time. Like I said, the time just flew by. It was great to talk to you again, to reminisce, but also just to, I knew I was with you for part of that journey, but the totality is really just so interesting to me, and I'm gratified to see where you are in life, and that you're a great example of never giving up, and even when times when you doubt yourself, which we all do. I'm very guilty of the imposter syndrome, throughout my career, and but you have to keep, like you said, that last tidbit you gave about basically leaning in, and doing it. I think it's important. So thanks so much for taking your time to be with us.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to speak with you again.
All right, well, that's another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast, and we've got some other wonderful guests like Karen lined up, but continue to hit that subscribe button, and please share the content, like it, and tell people about it. We try to, and please continue to comment and let us know how we can make things better, so that we can give you the content that's going to help you grow your leadership and business acumen. So till next time, we'll be back at you for another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.